Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I am Nicole and I do live here in India. And today I'm with my mostly best friend, Laurence.
Oh, change of title.
Mostly only friend, best friend, Laurence. And she is here to help me give a reaction to a Think School production, which we
Nice.
really enjoy watching
Yeah.
him. He's great. And this is on recession fears in America.
Fun
Is,
topic.
is India in trouble? It's an economic case study. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Let's
Let's
hear him out
see. Let's
and
hear
then
him
we'll
out, see what he says. Is there a recession? Most likely. How will it affect India? I'm sure it will. Let's see what he has to say. If you haven't already, give me your like, give me your subscribe, and let's go.
Hi everybody. In the past 20 days, the US stock market just lost $4 trillion.
Wiping out $4 trillion in market value from the S&P 500.
The S&P 500 had its biggest one-day drop.
The chance of recession is higher than most people believe.
Many experts believe the US could enter a recession this year.
$4 trillion is like wiping out the entire GDP of India in just 20 days. And this bloodbath did not leave any giant behind. Apple lost $174 billion in a single day, Tesla lost $127 billion, Nvidia lost $140 billion, and the US stock market is bleeding.
Apple shares posting their worst month in more than 2 years.
America's biggest technology companies lost some $750 billion in all.
Even Tesla, it turns out, doesn't like tariffs. That company, owned by President Trump's right-hand man, Elon Musk, has sent a letter to the administration warning that it could be affected by retaliatory tariffs from the escalating trade war.
This isn't just a market crash. This is the beginning of something very, very scary because it is not just the stock market. Look at this. The interest rates in the US are at a 20-year high. Housing is becoming absolutely unaffordable for Americans. Credit card default just hit a 14-year high. And now Trump has declared a trade war against China.
We've been ripped off by every country in the world, friend and foe. We've been ripped off on trade.
Trump administration's tariff on Chinese goods is officially in effect and have a trickle-down effect that could hurt American businesses and American consumers.
New invisible wall of tariffs being built by Donald Trump could act as a barrier for millions of American families.
And if you think it's only Americans, remember, when the United States sneezes, the entire world catches a cold. And in India, we are already seeing the bloodbath happen. Foreign investors are pulling money out, the markets are volatile, and the economic uncertainty is rising with each passing day. So is the US heading for a full-blown recession? If yes, how will this shake India? And most importantly, since we are expecting a recession, how can you protect your family? Stay with me till the end because what's coming next could change everything you know about the economics of the 21st century. You know, most people think a recession is simple. If GDP goes down for 2 quarters, they call it a recession. But that's not how it works. There are two definitions of a recession. There is the technical recession and there is real recession. So if GDP shrinks for 2 consecutive quarters, it's called a technical recession. But right now, if you see, the US GDP is still growing. It's just that the growth has slowed down. But the second definition is where the drama is. The National Bureau of Economic Research defines real recession by asking 4 critical questions. Number 1, are people losing jobs as in employment? Number 2, are wages rising or falling as in income levels? Number 3, are people still shopping or are they cutting back on their spending as in consumer spending? And is the industrial production increasing or decreasing? This is what we call as industrial productivity. And right now, the US economy is flashing mixed signals.
Recent mixed signals are fueling uncertainty, adding to existing concerns over the impact of tariffs on inflation and economic growth.
It is essential that we bring inflation down to our 2% goal.
And on Thursday, the government reported that the gross domestic product fell for the second straight quarter, a signal that the economy may be in a recession.
Prices are up. Interest rates are up, and the gas prices are up, and you can understand why so many people are worried.
Where is the economy going? And I think a good point to make is it's hard to predict the future, but right now it's hard to predict the present.
Look at this. The GDP is still growing, but it has slowed down from 3.1% to 2.3% growth. The job market is cooling, but not collapsing. But the stock market is extremely volatile, and the interest rates are high. So the question is, if we are not in a real recession according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, then why the hell is everyone panicking? Well, that is because there is one chart that has predicted every major US recession in the past 50 years. And right now, this chart is screaming danger. This is called the yield curve. And look at this. Every single time, I repeat, every single time it has inverted, a recession has followed.
Have you ever heard of a yield curve?
No.
Yeah, this is new to me. I have never had heard of this term before. It's very, very interesting.
In 2007, the yield curve inverted and the financial crash hit in 2008. In 2000, the yield curve inverted and the dot-com bubble burst. In 1969, the yield curve inverted and recession struck in 1970. In 1973, the yield curve inverted and another brutal recession hit the world. And now, the yield curve is almost about to get inverted. So, two questions. What the hell is a yield curve and how does it predict a recession? Well, let's understand this using a story. Let's say the government needs a 1 crore rupee loan for 3 years. So it issues a bond of 100 units with each unit costing 1 lakh rupees with a 3-year term and a 2% interest. So if you buy 1 unit of this bond, the government will pay you 2,000 rupees in year 1, 2,000 rupees in year 2 and 2,000 rupees in year 3. And after 3 years, after using this money, you will get back your 1 lakh rupees. Sounds simple, right? But now comes the tricky part. Most people think yield is just another word for interest rates. But that's not the case. Look at this. Here's the difference. Interest rate is fixed by the government. So when the bond is issued, the government fixes the interest rate. In our example, it's 2% per year. So no matter what happens in the market, this 2% will not change for those investors who bought the bond directly from the government. But if you look at yield, it changes based on market demand. And here's where things get very, very interesting. Let's say you bought the bond for 1 lakh rupees at a 2% interest rate. But suddenly the government issues a fresh bond with an interest rate of 5%. So now nobody wants to buy your 2% bond because they can get a fresh bond with 5% interest instead, right? So if you try to sell your bond before 3 years, you cannot sell it for 1 lakh rupees. So you will have to lower the price to attract buyers. Now let's say you sell it for 50,000 rupees. Now the new buyer will still get 2,000 rupees per year, which is the fixed interest rate. And since they only paid 50,000 rupees, their actual return, as in their yield, is 2,000 rupees divided by 50,000 rupees into 100 equal to 4%. This is called a yield. And if you see the yield of this bond, the yield just shot up from 2% to 4%. So now the interest rate is still 2%, which is fixed, but yield is 4% because the buyer paid less for the bond. This means when bond prices go down, yield goes up. And if you've understood the difference between yield and interest, let's talk about what's happening right now in the US and why should India pay attention. You see, in a healthy economy, investors are very confident of the future. So long-term bonds get high yields and the short-term bonds get low yields in the market. So if you buy a 1-year bond, you might get a yield of about 3%, whereas a 10-year bond might offer a 5% yield. Now this is normal. So if you plot the yield of a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year and 30-year bond, it creates an upward sloping yield curve, meaning The longer you invest, the higher the yield. But then you know what, guys? Something changes when recession comes closer.
President Donald Trump's tariffs have spooked investors, wiping out $4 trillion in market value. Amid the fears of recession and an economic downturn, investors are pulling out of the American stock market.
Chairman of the Federal Reserve announced on Wednesday that the Fed is again raising interest rates to combat inflation.
The economy is heading toward a recession. The stock market is tanking and people's costs keep going up.
When the inflation is high, when the interest rates are rising, when companies are struggling, stock markets start crashing. And this is when the investors get scared. So now, instead of keeping their money in the stock market, they rush to buy long-term government bonds because they are safer. But here's the twist. They don't trust the short-term future of the economy, so they avoid buying one-year bonds. Instead, they rush to buy long-term bonds like 10 years or 30 years bond. And this sudden demand for long-term bonds pushes the prices of these long-term bonds up. And when the bond prices go up, what happens? The yields go down. At the same time, because very few people are buying short-term bonds, the prices of these bonds starts falling. And when the bond prices fall, the yields go up. And this is where the yield curve inverts, because now the bond market looks like this. 1-year bond is giving out 6% yield, which is higher than before, and 10-year bond is giving out a 4% yield, which is lower than before. And here's where the yield curve inverts. Now look at this. The yield curve is almost about to invert. The 1-month bond yield is already higher than the 6-month yield, the 5-year yield, and even the 10-year yield. And the 3-month yield is higher than the 5 and 7-year yield. Usually, if the 3-month yield is higher than the 10-year yield, recession is expected to arrive. This is one of the biggest recession warnings in the financial world. Because like we saw, in the past 50 years, every time the yield curve inverted, recession followed. Now, the reason why this is surprising is because when Trump came to power, everything seemed like a fairy tale in the market. Investors were optimistic, businesses were expanding, and the Wall Street was celebrating. But then everything started to change.
Stock market closed out the week with the worst day of the year so far. The NASDAQ and S&P also were off. These losses are coming amid growing concerns about economic growth.
Tech-heavy NASDAQ plunged 4%.
Elon Musk's Tesla suffered a 15% decline, and tech darling Nvidia fell 5%, and Alphabet and Meta fell more than 4% on the day.
From mid-February, the momentum suddenly reversed, and then came Monday, which was the day of bloodbath. This is when the Nasdaq plummeted by 4%, which was its steepest one-day drop since 2022. So the question is, what exactly happened and why did investors suddenly lose confidence in the market? Well, firstly, Trump's trade war is back and it's hitting very, very hard. And in response to these tariffs, China has now retaliated with tariffs on American exports. And now this move is backfiring in multiple ways. Firstly, tariffs will make everything more expensive. If you see the US, it is a net importer, meaning it depends heavily on goods from other countries. And when it comes to China, this gap between the US and China stands at $279 billion. So US imports $279 billion more than it exports to China. And the biggest shocker is that the tariffs aren't hurting the Chinese. They are hurting the American consumers themselves.
Trump administration's tariff on Chinese goods is officially in effect and have a trickle-down effect that could hurt American businesses and American consumers.
New invisible wall of tariffs being built by Donald Trump could act as a barrier for millions of American families.
Tariffs in general raise the price of everyday goods because companies pass the higher importing cost onto consumers.
It's the American importers who will pay the tariffs for the goods at the port of entry, and they will pass on the cost to American retailers, who in turn will have to raise prices for American consumers.
Look at this. Before Trump's tariffs, an American bought a Chinese-made smartphone for $1,000. And here comes Trump, who decides to punish China and slaps a 10% tariff on Chinese electronics. So this sounds great, right? Because it seems like China will be paying for this. Well, except they don't. Instead, the Chinese company just increases the price of the smartphone from $1,000 to $1,100. So now the same phone is 10% costlier. So who's paying these extra $100? It's not some uncle sitting in Beijing, it is Bob from Texas and Karen from New York who are standing at the store thinking, why the hell is this phone costing $100 more? So if you think about the situation very, very closely, you will see that the burden is not being borne by the businesses but the consumers of America. This is the problem because of which consumers are paying the price, businesses are bleeding profits, and the stock market is crashing. And now the United States is helpless because they simply cannot produce as much as they need. Because if you look at the numbers, the US lacks manufacturing capacity. If you remember from our trade war case study, a Tesla Model 3 is 65% cheaper to be made in Shanghai than in the US. Secondly, even with additional taxes, the American products still can't beat Chinese products, and China's price advantage is so mind-blowing that in footwear and headwear goods, China was the lowest cost supplier for 59% of the products. And even in metal products, this number stood at 54%. So instead of punishing China, these tariffs are just punishing the American people. And you know what's the worst part? This is just the beginning. Because the second problem is that US companies are burning their profits. Why? Because many American businesses depend on China for raw materials, parts and manufacturing. In fact, companies like Apple, Tesla and Microsoft, they rely on China for raw materials. So if you see what's happening, higher raw material prices equal to lower profits, equal to lower stock prices, and lower stock prices equal to investor panic, which causes a massive market sell-off. This is the reason why the US markets are seeing a steep decline. So if you think about it, it's not at all surprising that Nasdaq, S&P 500 and Dow Jones, all of them have been plunging. And the worst part is that tariff wars are just getting worse. Look at this. In February 2025, Trump announced 25% tariff on all goods from Mexico and Canada and 10% on Canadian crude oil. And just a few days later, the White House postponed these tariffs after Mexico agreed to deploy 10,000 troops to control border crossing. But by late February, suddenly, Trump reversed the course again and declared tariffs as planned. So on 4th of March, the US officially implemented these tariffs.
Whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth.
Mexico and Canada and the tariffs set to go on next week, and saying tariffs are scheduled to go into effect on March 4th, and they will indeed go into effect as scheduled. On China, China will likewise be charged an additional 10% tariff on that date.
So in return, what happened? Canada immediately slapped 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods, and China placed a massive tariff back on America. And the result is that there is absolute chaos and uncertainty in the market, and nobody knows whether the US economy will keep growing or it will start to collapse. And you know what, guys? Investors absolutely hate uncertainty. And when they see it, they sell their stocks, so stock market tanks. In fact, even the US dollar started to depreciate as global investors fled to safer assets like gold and Japanese yen. But this brings us to a very, very important question. How will this bloodbath affect India, and what must we do to protect ourselves from a recession? Well, the first thing you need to know is that the impact on India is real. Look at this. While the S&P 500 plunged 7.5% in the last 1 month, the Nifty 50 also dropped by 2.7%. But this is where the biggest risk comes in. You see, the US is a major market for Indian IT services, pharmaceuticals and textiles. And if the American economy slows down, the demand for Indian exports could drop. In fact, we are so dependent on the US that TCS, Infosys and Wipro, they get 50%, I repeat, 50% of their revenue only from US. So if US businesses start cutting spending, India's IT sector will take a hit. But the real danger is that it doesn't stop with IT. Every single US-driven export industry in India is in serious trouble, because the US is India's #1 export partner. So if Americans stop spending, India feels it immediately. So if pharmaceutical exports drop, Dr. Reddy's and Sun Pharma type companies will suffer. If textile exports slow down, the factories in Surat and Ludhiana will take a hit. And if auto part exports stall, Indian auto supplies will get crushed. This is the reason why they say if the US sneezes, the entire world catches a cold. And lastly, the moment the US slips into a recession, foreign investors will pull money out of emerging markets like India. In fact, during the 2008 crash, foreign portfolio investors withdrew 52,000 crores from the Indian markets, leading to a 60% market crash. So if history repeats itself, we all must expect high market volatility in the Dalal Street. So this brings us to the ultimate question. What should you do to protect yourself from a terrible recession? Well, the solution, guys, is very straightforward. Don't buy unnecessary or expensive things and get into an EMI trap. Build an emergency fund and have at least 6 to 12 months worth of expenses saved in case of a job loss or financial uncertainty. Secondly, do not make big purchases like buying a home. And most importantly, please enhance your skills, because only skills can save you during a volatile market. And if you're not sharpening your skills, whether that's mastering hard skills or getting a grip on communication, you are setting yourself up for failure. Because the truth is that if you're a terrible communicator, the odds of you getting laid off are sky high. And nobody, I repeat, nobody cares how hard you work if you cannot express your ideas, if you cannot bring value, and if you can't present strategy, you are of no use. So please learn both hard and soft skills as soon as possible. This is what we need to know about the US recession, impact on India, and what must we do to protect ourselves from having a terrible time during a recession. Or lastly, we can just hope that US doesn't enter a recession. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
What do you think?
I think the advice is very valuable, and I don't think that we will not hit recession. I think it's coming.
Yeah, I think it's coming too, for sure. It's going to be a tough couple years.
Yeah.
I also do think too that these are years where it is actually important to invest. Like when the market goes down, a lot of people pull out and a lot of people, stop putting their money in the market when it is actually one of the better times to invest. If you can get your Wipro stock for less, if you can invest in things at a much reduced price, knowing or having faith that the market will go up in a year or two, that is giving you the ability to make that much more money. So although it's hard to invest during a time where things are going down, I know that we are going to continue to invest because generally recessions do not last forever. I mean, they are long and they can be difficult, but the markets generally come back. And at that point, we'll be able to...
yeah, it depends how much time you are willing to...
it depends on how much time you're willing to
yeah.
wait. Because, I mean, generally, at least for us personally, we are in it for the long haul. We know that things go up and things go down. And investing when the market is down, it is, like I said, it's difficult. It's difficult to want to put your money into something that is actively reducing, sometimes day by day. But you can actually get, more bang for your buck that way. If you have if you do have the income to do that, if you haven't lost your job and you are steady, my advice is to also be steady with your investing. Make sure that, make sure you have your 6 to 12 months. That's, I think, a great plan. Make sure you have money set aside, that not everything is going into the market, that you are saving, that you have a backup plan. I think that is important. But I do believe that saving or continuing to invest when the market goes down is just good strategy.
I don't know. Yes, we came out of every single recession, but truth is he's changing the rule of the game, so we don't know what tomorrow is going to look
that's
like.
true.
So,
However, hopefully it's just another 4 years, right? Hopefully.
yeah, but, I mean, someone in some documentary I was watching was saying that once the prices go up,
they don't ever go down.
For food or whatever, they would not
go back down.
Right. So even if things get better, the truth is
We're still going to be paying more.
We're still going to pay more. It's still, we know we are going to hit the people crisis with the food crisis and all of that. So I
Yeah.
really don't know where we are going.
That's very true.
My advice would be find a place away from everybody else, build a fence and just live there.
Build a fence and live
Yes.
there. Grow your own food
And live there.
and live there.
Don't talk to anybody.
Don't talk to any.
listen
Don't
the
interact
news.
with anybody.
No. Just keep your family with you. and
Keep your family with you and be safe. Maybe we'll have to look into that option as well. All right, people, that's our reaction. If you like it, give a like, give a subscribe. If you'd like us to watch something else, please put it in the comments. We would love to hear from you. As always, we love you and bye-bye.
Bye.